Today we'll start working on the Paper 3 SAICA January 2025 IAC, previously called ITC or SAICA First Board Exam. So how we approach our question, or how do we approach our exam? We start reading the required. And what is the main reason that we start reading the required? You start reading the required so that you understand what examiner will be looking or will want you to answer. Once you know what the examiner wants from you, as you read the scenario, you will know exactly what are the things you need to highlight as you go along your scenario. For example, if the examiner wants to know the risk pertaining to acquisition, as soon as you reach that section that speaks of acquisition, it will be at that point that you start highlighting all the matters that you feel are risk related. If the question speaks about an error in one of the journals that have been prepared by the accountant, when you reach that section, you'll ask yourself what will be required correction as you move along the scenario. And you also know exactly what are the things that you need to highlight and what are the things that you do not need to highlight in the scenario. Highlighting the scenario takes a lot of time. So if you know exactly what is required of you, you're only going to highlight the things that matters for that paper, or the things that you need to understand and digest while you are reading the scenario. It is for that reason I ask you that you start with the required, know what what the examiner wants you to respond to, and as you go through the scenario, you know the section that you need to put more focus on. You know the section that you need to highlight or write next to, because they pertain to matters that you will have to respond to when you respond to the examiner, right? So that is the main reason that I want you to start with the required. And the purpose is that you will know as you go through the scenario what you will need to put more focus on. Now let us look at the paper 3 required and see what we had there. So in paper 3, we are told that it's broken down into two. You have part 1 and part 2, and you have one scenario. So there's part 1 and part 2. However, to respond to both part 1 and part 2, you have only one scenario. What does that mean? It means that you'll be provided information about one company and maybe the company division. Then, when you respond to the matters pertaining to that company. However, it will be in two different parts, which will be part 1 and part 2 in this case. And then what else does the examiner want from you? They ask you that please use separate answer book. Why do they want that? It might happen that different people will be marking your paper, or different groups will be marking your paper. So if you respond in one question, you're making SAICA's marking process a little bit harder. So it is better that you follow exactly what you have been required in the required section. Now that we know that we have one scenario and then we have two required parts, now let us go and read what is in the required, starting with part 1. If we're looking at part 1A, we are required to calculate the WACC as at 30 November 2023 that TT could use in evaluating whether to invest in the project drawn. You are asked to ignore that. So now that you see the information in A, what we can take from there? We can take from this information that the company we're going to be working on, or we're going to be responding to the matters in this required, it's TT. So the company name that will be presented in the scenario, it's TT. And if you see it says TT, that means it's abbreviated here. That means there is a full name for this company, which you will see when we get to the scenario. And then the other thing that you see here is that you are asked to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So as soon as you get to the information where maybe the directors, they ask you to calculate the WACC, or where you see information regarding Project Ron, then you know exactly that you are going to be required to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. Now, what you're going to be doing when you come across this project, you're going to highlight everything that relates to the cost of business, which will be your shares as well as the loan, right? So you know that in order to calculate weighted average capital, you need information pertaining to the loan, the interest rate relating to the loan, the shares, and the required return. So you know those information will be important for you in order to determine the weighted average cost of capital. For that reason, as you get to these projects, to the section that talk about this project, all the information that has the details and the amount that you will need to calculate weighted average cost of capital, you will highlight those amount, or you will mark close to those amount, because you know for your required A of part 1, you need to use that information. It is for that reason that I ask you that start with the required, see what the required wants, because some information in the scenario will not be required, or you're not gonna respond to that particular information. For that reason, you will read it, but you don't have to reread twice, or you don't have to think deeper about the other part that is in the scenario. Now that we have went through this one, which is part 1, and we know that what we're going to be looking at when we get to the scenario. Now let's move to B. B says, using the forecast information for the project run provided by Denzel, calculate the IRR and conclude on whether it was the correct decision for T-Team to go ahead with drone fleet purchase. So now if you see here, the required says we need to calculate the internal rate of return, that is IRR. And the information we're going to use as the forecast. Meaning to say, you're going to be provided the information. Maybe you're going to be given the information for the current year or next year, and then you'll be provided the inflation or escalation rate that you need to use to adjust your numbers to the future, right? Because you're told that you will be provided focused information. And then if you look again here, it says you're gonna have to then conclude, right? So that means that 2 things that are required from you in this question. You need to calculate the internal rate of return, and using that internal rate of return information, conclude whether the decision to go ahead and purchase the fleet was a correct decision for the company. Obviously, if you're deciding that the decision is correct, you're looking at whether is it beneficial to the stakeholders of the company. And the stakeholders of the company includes number of people, which could be employees, the shareholders, the lenders, SARS, to mention the few. It could be other shareholders that you will be asking yourself, is this purchase going to be beneficial for them? And then there's additional information that we need to consider. The examiner is saying use the WACC rate provided by the directors as the benchmark rate. That means now you have something that you would use as a benchmark. After you've calculated IRR, you use WACC provided by the directors as your benchmark in making this evaluation for the purchase of this fleet. And then the next point says provide a brief explanation for any irrelevant amounts. So now the information that you be provided, not all information you will need to use. However, what the examiner is asking is that please provide explanation for amounts that are irrelevant for your calculation of IRR. Provide brief explanation for anything that is irrelevant. Don't just leave the amount and say nothing about it. bring it in and say this amount is not relevant for decision making. Because some amounts are not relevant for decision making. Some amounts are sunk cost. So if something is a sunk cost, it's not relevant for your calculation of IRR. So the number of amounts might not be relevant. For those amounts, you need to bring in and say, this is not a relevant amount. And then the third point, it says ignore the information relating to the sale of the planes. So from what we see here, seems like they're going to make the sales of the plane in order to purchase the drones. So now they're saying ignore any information relating to that sale. So now you know that for the purpose of calculating IRR, you do not have to consider any information that relates to the sale of the planes. And also, when you're talking about irrelevant amounts, you do not have to say anything relating to the amount for the purchase of the planes. And the last part, it says ignore that. And then what are the extra marks that you can get out of part B? You can get judgment and decision making. How you get that? The examiner will look at the way that you are concluding on this evaluation of the decision for the purchase of drones. So if your judgment and decision is flowing and is correct and it makes sense and it will add value to the director, you will get that amount. And then problem solving. So basically, you're going to be concluding or you're going to be telling the director that this is not a correct decision based on 1, 2, 3, or it is a correct decision based on 1, 2, 3, just for those conclusion and the way you articulate yourself, you will get another 1 mark. So if you look at the Y4 and Y3, those mark as soon as you put in you do your calculation, you use WACC as a benchmark, you put the explanation or the conclusion, whether it's correct decision or not correct decision, based on the information that you provided on the scenario. In that way, you stand a better chance of getting those marks. Examiners will say this mark, if you answered exactly what you were asked, it's most likely that you're going to get that mark. If you respond to what you have been asked, number 1, and you articulate yourself properly, you will get this mark. It might happen that someone will say it's a correct decision, but if the justification is correct, they'll get the mark. And someone else might say, no, it's not a correct decision. If the calculation that they use and the justification that it provided makes sense and is correct, then that person will get the mark. So that is why it is important for you to understand the required properly. And that is why I prefer that you start reading the required while your mind is still fresh. And then you understand properly and thoroughly what the examiner wants from you. And then C says, discuss the key strategic risk and benefit in the decision to invest in drones that may affect the overall sustainability of spray tea and provide overall mitigating action for the strategic risk identified. So now what are we looking at now? They are saying, based on the decision that have been made to invest in the project drones, you need to discuss the risk and discuss the benefit. So you discuss what is good and what is not, right? Or what is the benefit and what is the risk. Then once you've done that, you have to put forward the mitigating actions regarding to the risk identified. Right. You're looking at obviously the sustainability of spray tea. Now one will ask, where's spray tea coming from? Because we are told that there is one scenario. This is what is possible. Spray tea is or could be a division in TT business. Why am I saying that? Because we know that we have one scenario. If we have one scenario, it means that it talks about one company or it talks about one person or related matters. So now we know that spray T, it means that is actually either the division or related company of TT. But by now, we don't know. We'll see when we come across the scenario and confirm what is spray T now, because by now we're not sure what it is. And then what is the other information that we are told? You are told that we must ignore VAT. So we need to ignore value added tax. And then discussion on the risk and benefits at 8 marks. Discussion on mitigating action is 3 marks. So what I want you to do when you are given marks, make sure that your points are in line with the marks. Each point will earn you a mark. So in this case, put 4 risk, 4 benefits, and then 3 mitigating actions. Don't try to put 20. You are wasting your time. Make sure what you write is correct and a basis of that is based on the scenario that you have. So use the information that you are providing in the scenario to generate this risk, to generate the benefit. And then the mitigating action is based on the risk that you would have provided. Don't try to say, no, I want to have max. No, the only way that I pass is to give them 20 points. You're wasting your time. You don't have time in the exam, unfortunately. That's the issue that we forget, is that in the exam room, you do not have time. So every time counts. So make sure that the time you have available, you use it in a way that is beneficial to you. You are told it's 8 marks. Bring in 8 points and make sure the 8 points that you bring in are valid. 4 for risk, 4 for benefits. Then how to mitigate what you've said it's a risk? 3 points. Then you bring it in, then you're done. Don't spend a lot of time trying to say, no, I want to make sure that I pass at least part C. If you pass C and you don't have enough time to do the other part, you're going to fail, unfortunately. So here we are trying to make sure that we are passing. So the only way to pass is to have good exam technique. So your good exam technique is what will make you pass. And what I want you also to do, be very free and flexible in the exam. Take the stress away. When you get to the exam, see yourself as a winner. And when you do that, you know for sure that you're going to pass that exam. You must see yourself as a winner. You must see yourself as someone that has successfully passed this exam. This takes us to the end of part 1. I will have a separate video for part 2. So please follow me, subscribe, like, and share my channel. And also look out for the next video, which will cover part 2 of the required. So this is only part 1. Thank you so much for listening until this point. Please follow me and subscribe on YouTube as well as on TikTok. My channel is Economics 199, both YouTube as well as the TikTok channel. Thank you so much and all the best for your exam. Bye.